We've got a text line, of course, 514-800, and I love all the texts we get throughout the show. Obviously, you can't read all of them on air because then I'd have nothing else to do on the program. But I want you to give me a text, 514-800, as we kick off this third hour of the show. Simple text I'd like from all of you at that number, 514-800. What's your Timmy's order? When you go to Tim Hortons, what do you order? What's the go-to? And I ask you that because we begin this third hour of the show talking about Tim Hortons, the company under fire from its franchisees in Quebec. And lo and behold, it's all about money. Susan Krashinsky Robertson, reporter at the wonderful Globe and Mail, is on the line with more. Susan, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
And you come on the show. We talk about Tim Hortons quite a bit when you talk on the show. So let's talk about the latest hullabaloo. What are the franchisees in Quebec saying?
Yeah, so it's nearly a dozen Quebec franchisees that are part of this lawsuit, which was they filed an application in Quebec Superior Court in Montreal last week. And basically, the core of it is it echoes complaints that we've been hearing from various dissident franchisees in the Tim Hortons organization for a little over a year now, saying basically their profits are going down, that, their costs have gone up so much, and menu prices haven't risen to keep pace with that, and they're just being squeezed on every side. So that's the basic core of the complaint. This lawsuit is new, but some of the things that it contains have been said by others in the past.
So in my mind, if the costs are up, why don't these Tim Hortons locations raise their prices to make up for it?
Well, when you think about a Tim Hortons restaurant, it's a huge chain, but the people who own those locations are essentially small business owners who buy into a system. That's the core of what any franchise business is, right? And as part of that setup, the people who own that store, they don't actually have control over all of its operations. Now, what franchisees receive when they buy into a system like this, ideally speaking, is all of the benefits, right, of being part of a really big, beloved brand. You think about Tim Hortons being so close to many Canadians' hearts. That draws a lot more traffic than, maybe your mom and pop coffee shop on the corner might be able to draw on its own. And, it gives them all kinds of things like strategizing about menu ingredients, things that people love, access to this huge pool of consumer data, all these things that small businesses wouldn't have on their own. The trade-off, though, as I said, is they don't always control those things. So to your question, why don't they just raise prices? Well, that's a decision, according to this court document, that isn't actually made by the franchisee. So if they see their costs going up, they are in many cases bound to the menu prices that are set by their parent company. That's according to these court documents. And so essentially they don't have room to move, and they don't actually have the ability to give themselves that wiggle room. And that's why this conflict has come to a head.
So the costs for them have gone up, and then corporate doesn't let them raise the price enough to cover that increase in costs.
That is what they say, yeah. And it's important to keep in mind, too, that, again, according to these allegations in this document, they don't also have control over their costs. They can't, in all cases, negotiate lower costs for the supplies they buy. In many cases, they're required to buy either from the Tim Hortons itself or from suppliers that Tim Hortons has done exclusive deals with. And so there's one complaint in this Quebec lawsuit that talks about how traditionally they were given an exemption to negotiate to buy certain dairy products, as a good example, from these local suppliers, and they were able to negotiate good deals. And then head office imposed a change there, and they weren't able to do that anymore and were required to buy their dairy products from a supplier that Tim Hortons determined. And that's, again, according to these court documents. We should note that Tim Hortons has not filed a statement of defense yet. They haven't yet responded to all of the details in these court documents, but that's what these 11 franchisees are saying.
Do we know if that's, if other chains act in a similar fashion? And I know before you've been on this program, we've talked about the battle between McDonald's and Tim Hortons for breakfast supremacy and coffee supremacy in this country. And I have noticed at McDonald's a big difference in prices depending on which one you go to in the same city. You'll just, to 10 minutes over, you go to a different location, different pricing. Do you know if that's different with Tim Hortons, where they're much more strict on that front?
That's a good question. I think all restaurant businesses engage in a little bit of that dynamic pricing based on various geographies, various neighborhoods. That's actually not out of the ordinary, and so you can see price fluctuations from place to place. The extent to which Tim Hortons engages in that, it's difficult to say, but I do think that that's a constant across the restaurant industry, particularly in quick service or fast food restaurants.
We are with Susan Krashinsky Robertson, the fantastic business reporter at the Globe and Mail, and we're talking about this lawsuit filed against Tim Horton by franchisees, some franchisees here in Quebec. Susan, you've come on this program to talk about the woes of Tim Hortons. Do you think that part of this lawsuit is because the hits have kept on coming? There's been so many battles in recent years between franchisees and Tim Hortons. Is this just the latest in that saga?
You know, what's interesting is this comes about 4 years after, as you mentioned, Tim Hortons actually settled some lawsuits with its franchisees. So there have been conflicts in the past. I think what's new here is that we've introduced the thing that is giving us all pain, right? Food inflation and inflation in general is the level of inflation that has occurred over the past 2 years. All you have to do is be a consumer who buys everyday necessities to understand just how painful these price increases have been. Well, that's been true for business owners too, right? You think about having to buy all of that cream that goes into your double doubles, even the paper products that they use, various other food ingredients. All the costs of these things have gone up. And for business owners, costs of things like labor have also increased. And so we've just seen that it's become a lot more expensive to do business. And so in some ways, what I find fascinating about this conflict is it's a microcosm of a conversation we're having across the economy. Who should be the one to absorb the effects of all of this inflation? Now, the parent company of Tim Hortons says that it has itself absorbed some of those effects, that as it's dealing with its suppliers, it hasn't passed on all of those cost increases to its franchisees. But we're seeing the same debates happen all over the place. We see it with grocers and their suppliers, right? So grocers have been saying, don't look at us. It's these food suppliers who've been raising their prices to us for these products. And, all the way down the supply chain line, who should be the one to, take on that hit of that rising price? And unfortunately, in many cases, the person who takes it on is the consumer. In this case, the franchisees say, a lot of that hit is coming our way and more of it than we feel is fair. And on top of all of that, you have to remember that when you buy into a franchise system as a small business owner who owns a franchise location, you also agree to pay other costs. There are things like licensing fees or franchise fees that you pay to the parent company. There are contributions to the advertising fund for them to advertise the brand. And there's also commitments to renovate those restaurants, to keep them up to date. It's a lot of investment that's expected out of these franchise owners. And so when you get a conflict like this where they say our profit margins aren't there and we're not making enough to sustain our profitability, that affects, they say, their ability to continue that investment in their businesses.
Susan, how's Tim Hortons doing in general? I see the expansion around the world, but what about the company? How are profits? How are earnings?
Profits are going up. Yeah, it's if you look at the parent company and how it's done over the past few years, its profits have risen. So Restaurant Brands, that's the name of the parent company that owns Tim Hortons, Burger King, and Popeyes. They reported net income, this is in U.S. dollars, of $1.25 billion in 2021. And that had gone up to $1.72 billion by last year. So that has been an increase in profits. They've also acknowledged that franchisee profitability at Tim Hortons has gone down. So the company reported that the average Tim Hortons location made about $320,000 in earnings. It's a big long term called earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, but it's a profitability measure. They say the average restaurant made about $320,000 in 2018, and that had gone down to $220,000 by 2022. And they have said that they're working on improving that. And they said that actually it did improve last year by quite a bit. It went back up to $280,000, but it's still not back up to those 2018 levels. So the leadership at the company has acknowledged, franchisee profitability and increasing franchisee profitability is really a priority for them. And really the conflict here is that some of their franchisees are saying it's not enough and we're really hurting right now.
Susan, you mentioned Restaurant Brands, the parent company, and then you mentioned Popeyes. Okay, so we don't have Popeyes here in Quebec. Have you had Popeyes? From Ontario, what's the view there? Do you enjoy Popeyes?
It's funny. I'm probably the worst person to ask about this because I'm not a fast food person myself. And so my views on fast food fried chicken are probably not super well informed. But no, Popeyes is growing fast, and Restaurant Brands, you're right to point out that they're in expansion mode. Not really in Canada as much as they are around the world. They're targeting huge restaurant growth in other countries around the world. And so they have an incentive to make sure that there is a credible value proposition for potential franchisees. And, their executive chairman, Patrick Doyle, who is a seasoned executive who led a turnaround at Domino's Pizza when he was there, he has said, our business does better when the franchisees are happy, when they feel they're making enough money to sustain themselves, and when they're able to invest in their businesses. So the executives say that the priority is there for them to improve this. And it remains to be seen, basically, whether this conflict will spread or whether this remains something with a small number of franchisees. For now, it's 11 in Quebec. And it's important to mention there are hundreds of Quebec franchisees who aren't yet part of this lawsuit. The parent company says that's a reflection of the fact that they don't reflect the majority of franchisees' points of view. But again, we have heard these kinds of complaints from others in the past. So it will be really interesting to see how the company handles this conflict and whether the discontent is spreading.
Susan, I just remembered as you were talking that I had Popeyes once. I was at a Tesla supercharger outside of New York City, and there was a Popeyes there. It was delicious, by the way.
There you go.
So maybe you want to head into one.
The locations at those charging sites are important, actually, for fast food companies because you've got a captive audience. So it's going to be really interesting. You'll see much more of that expansion tied to those charging sites as electric vehicles become more popular.
Susan, you were one of the reasons why I pay for a subscription to Globe and Mail. You're fantastic. Thanks so much. You're always welcome on this show.
Thank you so much.
Susan Krashinsky Robertson right there from the Globe and Mail.